From a closet, also known as the Jim McCarthy Voiceovers World Headquarters Studio, this is the JMVO Weekly Primer. Please subscribe, rate, and comment via jimmccarthyvoiceovers.com/podcast. Thank you for listening to episode 21 of the JMVO Weekly Primer. I've actually don't have my iPad in front of me, which has my monologue on it. But basically, this is the podcast if you want to marinate your mind in good, positive stuff. And a lot of business owners and salespeople, we're bombarded by constant negative stuff and negativity all the time. And it helps to marinate your mind in good stuff. This is why I started this podcast. And today is no exception. I love thinking about topics like this in terms of building wealth and moving forward. First, let me say that if you're a fan of the podcast, please share it out. If you tell people about it, comment down below in the comment section wherever you're listening or watching, and ask questions for those who are watching live. This is going to be a pretty cool interview. I have Mr. Tony Bradshaw as my guest today, and I'm going to let you tell everybody a little bit about yourself instead of me setting you up. I know all about you. You spent a lot of time with a very I guess you could say famous local author and personality, but he's also national as well. So, Mr. Tony Bradshaw, you take it away. Give us a sum up of who you are in 3 to 5 minutes, if you could.
3 to 5 minutes. I tend to be a little bit long-winded, so we'll see if I can do that.
5 to
5 to 10, that might work. Yeah, so I'm a father of 6, got 6 kids, coming up on 20 years of marriage this year, so pretty excited about that. October 3rd is our date. Yeah, it's a long time. You know, you don't think about it, but yeah, it's a long time. Yeah. So I began my career with a mechanical engineering degree, and then spent about 6.5 years in the mechanical engineering field. Really loved that. But while I was there, I learned about technology, and this is right around the .com age when it was coming around. And so in 2001, I decided to change my career path, and I jumped out of the engineering field and jumped into technology and into the internet. And that's where I really got my legs under me. I was very fortunate to get into a small company at the time. There were about 30 people. And then as they were growing in the internet business, internet world, they needed somebody to kind of spearhead that for them. And I was fortunate to fall into that and became a kind of like a digital entrepreneur is probably the best way. Even though I worked inside of another company, I spearheaded their transition from kind of like an analog business into the digital world. So we launched things like e-commerce platforms, online ticketing systems before online ticketing systems exist. We were selling events, ticket sales online, doing e-commerce. Actually, one of the things I'm probably most proud about was for that company, we were able to create an online lead generation system. And so they had been collecting leads through like faxing leads out. So there wasn't a lot of technology used in the process. And we totally made it an online process. And that was kind of one of the things that really helped that part of the business grow. And today is one of the larger elements of the business. So, but yeah, so while my career wrapped up there in 2016, it was a personal finance company. I'm going to leave the author's name or the person I worked for off the list there. Yeah, it was a good run, man. It was like 15 years, had a good time. Got to see that company go from about 30 people up to about 560. But it was my time to go. You know, 15 years with any company is a really long time. And even though I was an entrepreneur inside the company, I really kind of yearned for doing something on my own. And I no longer fit the company. They needed something that I wasn't able to do for them anymore. And I needed something a little bit different as well. And so I took a year off and kind of stretched my legs, spent some time with my family, tried to figure out what was my next step in life. And then last year, I kind of got the yearning to kind of, write a book. And that's kind of where I'm at today. I just finished the book up, and it took about a year's process, and it's coming to market. It should be done at the publishers, getting finished up and getting ready to go out into the marketplace. Pretty excited about that.
Well, and the book is called The Millionaire Choice. I had the pleasure of reading it. It's somewhat of a pretty quick read and a pretty good roadmap. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we had Matt Monero on. He wrote a book called You Need More Money, and, tells about the story of his brother-in-law. And I believe there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. And a lot of people, there's so many different gurus out there that think it's their way or nothing. You know, we find that we come across a lot of that. I see, you know, I'm kind of wondering as to why you don't want to mention the company you work for. It was a pretty big one and a fairly well-known dude. And a lot of the principles are, I mean, I know they're pretty much, you know, derived from the company that you worked for, but you take it the next step, which a lot of the gurus out there that take this guy to task say he doesn't do. You know, getting your financial house in order, taking care of really bad debt, leveraging good debt, and then actually starting to build that wealth. But the premise of the podcast and the show today is at some point in time, a switch went off for you to want to make it to where you're worth seven figures, correct?
Yeah, sure did. And that's what's a little bit different, I think, about my story. I think all these guys that are doing this kind of material out there, and ladies that are doing that material, you're right. Everybody does kind of feel like their way is the way. And the reality is people become millionaires multiple different ways. And I don't think there's just one way to do it. There was my way that I did it, but I also acknowledge that, you know, along my journey writing this book, I talked to a lot of millionaires, and they did it different ways than I did. And so some of them did it a lot faster than I did. And I wish I had maybe done it their way instead of my way, because they got there, you know, another 10 years faster than I did. But yeah, so at 25, I was kind of, you know, realized that I wasn't really managing my money well. When I got my first W-2 check out of college for my first full year of work as an engineer, and saw that I made $39,000, which was at least 4 times the amount of money I had made any other year in my life. It just woke me up, because I was $16,000 in debt, but I had made 39 grand, and I knew my expenses weren't very high. And I could not imagine where all that money went. I couldn't figure it out. Like, you know, I was living in a studio bedroom apartment with my parents with really low rent. You know, I had a TV that I had paid cash for, a stereo system, a financed car, and a financed computer system. And it just, the math didn't work. You know, I went to school for engineering. I knew what 2 + 2 meant, and it just didn't connect for me. And so it was that time that I said, you know what? I can't ever do this again. I can't repeat what I did last year, this year. And so I went out to Books A Million out in Rivergate area out in Nashville, Tennessee, and just started buying magazines and books and started reading about money. And it was after about 90 days of studying hard, I'm like, you know what? I can be a millionaire by the time I'm 40. This is a math problem, and I can do the math. And if I do this right, and save enough money, invest enough money the right way, and keep my expenses low, I can become a millionaire by the time I'm 40. Now, I was a little bit idealistic at the time, being a 25-year-old. And so, you know, life changes. I got married, had 6 kids. So that kind of threw a couple monkey wrenches in the formula.
Yeah, they cost a bit of money.
Yeah, that kind of adds up. And you kind of realize what that is. But at the same time, you know, opportunity came knocking too. And so, and that's why in my book, I didn't really want to focus just on the financial principles, which a lot of people do. I wanted to focus on getting smart about money, but also about character and time management, because it's the resources that we squander, which is, you know, our own abilities and our own time, that really hold us back from being able to do great things. And also, you know, becoming a millionaire is a pretty tall order. And it's, you know, there's, you know, roughly about 10% of the American households in America are millionaire households. But I think that number should be a lot higher, because I wasn't some brilliant, you know, high IQ guy. I'm just an average working class dude that went to a small college and grew up in a, you know, lower middle income family.
And you'll find that a lot of the millionaires out there are the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I talked to one guy, he grew up in Compton. He was the only white guy, Italian, in an African-American and Hispanic community. And, and his, you know, his dad still lives out there, but he became a millionaire by the time he was 30. And he made the decision a lot earlier than I did. I think he said he made it when he was probably about 20, 22 years old. And he was able to get there by age 30. It took me a little bit longer than him. But, you know, those stories are all over the place.
Well, a lot of the people, you know, a lot of the constructs that are be putting out there are making a lot of money within the construct that you're living in. Okay. Meaning that if you're used to making $45,000 to $60,000 a year, here's how to optimize that. the guys, the gurus that we're, the Cardones, I think Gary Vee even talks about this. A lot of the guys who are part of the 10X crowd tend to talk about, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but you need to increase your income. And if, you even said it, it was a math problem. And there's a list of ways, and I call it reducing it to the ridiculous, as breaking it down. 13 ways to $1 million. There's a salary of $50,000 for 20 years, a salary of $100,000 for 10, a salary of $250 for 4. Breaking it down, earn $114 per hour every hour of the year. 5,000 people buy a $200 product, 2,000 people, but breaking it up all those different ways. And once you really break it down and you find the one that makes sense to you, I'm in voiceovers and video. And of course, as you well know, I'm a co-owner of Big Dot Lighting. And, that's probably, both of those plays, I kind of spin both of those plates. But in the voiceover world, I would have to sell 160 my product. If I sold $1,000, I would have to sell it to 1,000 people. If I sold 1,000 videos, which would be a lot of work, but that would get me to $1 million. And a lot of people don't wrap their mind around that. They want to do it in the construct where they presently are instead of actually adding. And you talk about that in your book. It's in chapter, let me pull it up here. Boost Your Income. Chapter 13. Getting past all the bad habits and everything and creating new disciplines. And discipline, Kevin Michelson just popped up with a comment. Discipline is the key to success in anything, including becoming a millionaire. How do you stay disciplined?
Man, that's probably, if you read my book, that's probably the one I confess to having the most difficulty with, honestly. Just because it gets away from you. It really does. I think for me, the biggest thing was, and it was with life too, and it probably started registering with me, with my family, first of all, because I would come home and, I had what I wanted to do. And I noticed that my kids were kind of ignoring me when I would come home from work. And that was kind of my first clue. Like, I'm like, man, if I was the dad I needed to be, my kids should be jumping off the couch and meeting me at the door and grabbing around my waist and, just yelling at me. And my kids were like, how you, Dad? And then just turn around and keep watching TV. And I'm like, man, I'm not doing it right. Like, I need to become disciplined in how I, father my children. And, what's a scorecard I'm keeping to make sure I'm doing a good job? And that was kind of like a wake up call for me. My career was kind of already disciplined on that track. Like I knew I wanted to grow in technology, so I focused on growing in technology, but I still had a lot of distractions. And what I realized was that I had just built up layer upon layer of distractions that took away my time. I was an avid gamer in my 20s and 30s, and that just got in the way. I was Netflix. When Netflix was mailing me DVDs, I believed I needed to watch them as soon as they hit the door. And so it would come in that day, I'd watch it that night and send it back the next morning to maximize my value of my, what I was paying Netflix. And so I was watching 2, 3, 4 DVDs, maybe more, maybe like 6 to 8 a week. And when you start adding those hours up, you're like, man, that's a lot of time that you're burning between all the things that you've got going. And I just came to a point where I'm like, I need to simplify my life. I need to take everything out of my life that's not essential and bring it down to the base level. And then I need to rebuild it back up. And that's what I did. I got rid of the Netflix. I got rid of the games. I got rid of everything that was not essential to life. And then I started going, what do I want to build my life back up with? And that's where I started focusing on my career and my family more. And that's when I saw my career start to take off. I started being able to do what the company needed us to do. Really, I kind of laugh because when I went to work for this company in this digital space, I was kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like, they had a price point they wanted to meet to hire somebody, and that's what I asked for. And that's why I got the job. It wasn't because I was the best guy or the most knowledgeable guy. It's because I was the guy that was willing to work for as little money as possible. And I knew just enough to get my foot in the door. And then once I did that, it just kind of fit, and the combination of the business experience plus the technology aptitude was able to take me to places that I really didn't plan on going. And you mentioned boost your income. That's one thing I like really talking about, because I was making about 47.5 when I left my job to jump into the technology space, and I knew I was going to have to take a pay cut. And so my pay cut dropped me down to 35 grand. So I made a career jump, and a lot of people think they've got to make more money when they make a career change. Well, I took a step back. It was like a 25% pay cut. But what I saw happen from that was within a year, I was making 3 grand more. And then within a year after that, I was making, I believe it was at least 15, maybe 20 grand more. And the year after that, I was making 15, 20 grand more. So I really focused on my career in my one job, and I was able to see my income just kind of ratchet up because I brought a lot more value to the company. And when you talk about Grant Cardone, some of these other guys, they really push like multiple income streams. So it's really like two schools of thought: focus on one thing or create multiple income streams. And the truth is, they both work. It just depends on what kind of fits you. For me, I focused on a single income stream and just specializing, and it really paid off for me. I got into multiple 6-figure income, and really worked it well. Other people, I know some people's got 4, 5, 6 different income streams, and they're happy doing that. But it's really a choice, I think, and what fits you.
Well, a lot of it comes down to, again, and Monero and I talked about this on our last podcast. I said that a lot of Americans, there are ways that they can use their time in addition to what they do at their job. 9 to 5, they go through the grind, they come home, they would sit down and they watch TV, but yet they complain there's not enough money for the end of the month. There's more month than there is money. And typically all Americans, I think the average is something like $500 to $100 to $1,000 in the savings account, and that's on a good day for most people. Where they could be, what Vaynerchuk talks about, going out and garage sailing on Saturday morning and flipping stuff on eBay for 3, 4, 5 times, and that can add another revenue stream for a family of 4 or 5 to pad, $25,000, $30,000 a year if you really double down on it.
Yeah, it's called focus. I mean, like you were saying, I had one friend, a younger guy. He was actually flipping furniture. So him and his wife would look through Craigslist and buy furniture at a discount. They knew what they could sell it for. And that's exactly what they did, exactly what you're saying. And they were making, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month, maybe a little bit more, just flipping furniture, and that fit for them. It fit their abilities. His wife was a stay-at-home mom. She could do that, look for furniture during the day. He could come home, they could make the deal. And, they learned to work as a team, and that worked out really well for them. So that's a great idea.
I think I might know who they are. Did they have a company after a while? Did they turn it into a business?
No, they kind of stepped away from that. He was an internet marketing specialist, and so he was able to go back into internet marketing and grow that business. So in the beginning of the book, for most Americans to start getting disciplined and focused, you got to get down to the fundamentals. They got to take care of what's wrong at home, correct? So not at home, I mean by, taking care of whatever extraneous bad debt that they have. And that's where you start off in the book with, a lot of the stuff that's been taught by the company you worked for. But again, I appreciate the fact that you at least take it for the next step and bring it on. But let's talk a little bit about that, of where people need to begin. Yeah. So for me, I just it was just very obvious to me that I had made the wrong decision because I made 39 grand, but somehow I was $16,000 in debt. So that's a $55,000 that just disappeared. It's like, it's just gone. And that didn't work. So I very quickly decided, debt is not part of the formula. If you want to be wealthy. For me, it was like, I'm a no debt guy. Now, some people like to leverage debt. I just don't like the risk. I like being debt free. It's a fun place to be. So I just, within a year and a half, I had just gotten a budget and said, hey, I'm going to save this much every month, and I'm going to get rid of this debt as fast as I can. And so I was able to pay off the $16,000 in debt and get about $18,000 to $20,000 in mutual funds and stocks within about 18 to 24 months. So I was 25 is when I had my wake up call. By the time I was 27, I was out of debt. And actually, I was about 6 months away from getting married. And so I just started paying off my wife's debt because she had about 20 grand in debt too. So I'm like, hey, I want to marry this woman. Her debt's going to be my debt. Let me just start paying on it as well, since I had become debt free. And we were able to knock out several $1,000s of her debt before even, got married. And
that's all credit card and student debt and things of that nature.
Yeah. Hers was car, credit card, and computer. She had financed the computer. And fortunately for her, her parents had taken care of her student loan debt. So we didn't have to deal with that. That was pretty sizable, I think, as well.
And then you start taking the extra money you would have been spending. And a lot of these guys that we've been talking about, they're all about leveraging the debt, like you said, like the debt you have in a house, the equity you have in a house. You know, I'm 43. I'm going to be 43 this month. I've come to the realization that other than it being a roof over your head, it's not really an asset unless it produces cash flow. And, you know, it's an increases in value over time, typically, if we hope, unless there's another 2008 happens. And of course, we don't want that to happen. But typically, I had this conversation this morning with a friend of mine. You know, he's thinking about, selling his house, and they had been putting more and more money a month away towards the mortgage. And to me, I'm like, you know what? That money is that you put into your house, you can't get to it unless you sell it or you get a HELOC and you take it out that way. You know,
yeah,
and that's
or
just
when you get older, when you decide to downsize. I know a lot of people kind of put all their money in their house and they downsize. I got a friend that just did that. And it's really a choice, though. I mean, what I talk about is I chose to pay my house off, but if you do the math, there's a percentage where it kind of breaks over, right? So if you're, you'd have to really look at it, but I believe the percentage is like right around 7%. So depending on what investment advisor you talk to, they're going to tell you you've got inflation's at 3%, and then the S&P 500, a mutual fund index stock, is going to grow at about 10. So your break even is really close to that 6 or 7% mark. So whatever your interest rate is, if your interest rate is like 3 or 4% or 5% on your house, you're going to make more money if you invest that home equity piece of it, and that's where the leverage comes in. I personally believe that the risk, and you have to weigh the risk, right? If you lose your job and you have a mortgage, well, you're probably you could lose your house. A lot of people do that. When the economy downturned, people lost their jobs, they lost their houses. Well, the guys that were debt free on their houses didn't lose their houses. And so nobody plans to lose their job, really. Most people don't. They don't expect that. It's kind of like the party's never going to end. If you've got a 6-figure income, you never imagine that you'll make less money. And so you don't prepare for the rainy day. You're, like you said, the savings, people don't have $500 to $1,000 in savings. Well, they don't expect the party to ever end, and I'll just talk about my dad for a minute. He's 67 years old. His health isn't real great. He doesn't have any retirement or anything. He's not ready. He thinks he's going to work until the day he dies. And that's a sad place to be. And, as a son, I feel a little bit guilty about that, but he knows, my lifestyle and my belief system, but he's living his life his way. Sadly, a lot of Americans live it just the exact same way. And it does put him at risk.
And a lot of, the retirement notion, a lot of people don't realize retirement's a new concept, to save up a bundle of money, and it worked for a while, but now it doesn't seem to be working as well for most people because incomes have stagnated. People aren't able to put, and obviously expenses have come up. I always talk with a lot of financial planners. I say, first off, you never truly own your house. That's just, I think that's a concept that should be put out there a little bit more, because even if you do pay it off and you can't make the tax payment on it, guess what? You don't own it.
That's true.
They can come and take your house. And that's ultimately, and a friend of mine, he's a money guy, and he tells me, he says, we've been marketed to that the American dream is home ownership and going to school and all this other stuff, but it benefits the banks over time, ultimately.
That's a totally crazy discussion when you go down that road about Yeah. Anyway, I interrupted you. What were you going to continue there? You were talking about it's a foreign concept.
A foreign concept to people is it's the retirement concept is relatively new. To work for a collected number of years, you put money in, and that money essentially, I know people that are in retirement that have to share a meal because they don't have enough retirement coming in, whether from bad planning or whatever. But the norm of the last 20 to 25, 30 years is not healthy right now, and people need to shift the way they think. A lot of people think making $100,000 is making it big. And again, hearkening back to the last episode I did with Matt Monero, he makes the point of, look, when I was 18, graduating college, that was the pinnacle. $100,000 a year. It's not what it was. The money moved. He says $100,000 a year put you in the 1% of top earners. Now it's 385. A lot of people don't realize that the money has moved. $50,000 to $100,000 in liquid cash. Would you say below that you should be considering yourself broke?
I don't know about that. I look at the total picture. So I look at a net worth number more than that, because it depends on where you put your money. When I was building going towards my goal of $1 million, at first I wanted all in stocks, and I put a lot of money in there. Then I decided I wanted to be out of debt and get rid of my house payment. So then I started putting all my money in my house. And then, eventually those became like 50-50. But I also had, I had built up my cash funds from, at first it's like $5,000, it becomes 15. So I had 15 grand in cash, but I wasn't broke. But I was, one job loss and 6 months away from, losing it all, right? Even if you got 15 grand, if you got a house payment, that money's gone within 3 to 6 months. So if you can't make a house payment and you don't have a job, and that's the thing that people get caught, right? So when you go, hey, I'm in debt, but I can make my payment. Well, what about when you can't make your payment? And that's the day that people don't prepare for. And that's the sad thing. And that's why people get caught and burned. That's why, I chose to go ahead and pay my house off. I wanted the security. If you look at the leverage guys, I would have had more money. But anyway, back to your question. I don't know that there's a hard number. I would say you want to look at your safety number and go, hey, am I building my net worth? And, the millionaire, I chose the Millionaire Choice because it's a milestone that I believe anybody can hit, almost anybody can hit, if they do and make the right choices. And that's why I'm a millionaire. But the truth is, on your journey to become a millionaire, you're going to wake up just like I did. And you're going to go, if I can become a millionaire, I can become a multimillionaire. And so your perspective on money changes. And my goal is really just to get people to take that first step, to kind of wake up and give them enough material, enough information, and enough thought, to go, I need to think about this differently. Just like you're saying, 100 grand is not a lot of money, but I was making 47.5.
$1 million's not a lot of money.
Yeah. And my wife was praying for 70. She's like, hey, if we could find a job making 70, well, we went way past that number. We blew way past it. But because I was stuck in that 47.5 mindset, I really couldn't think past that. But what I could think, because I knew how to do math, is that I could still make it to be a millionaire, even if I was making $47,500. Today, it's more difficult. That was 20 years ago when I got that vision. Today, it's a lot more difficult on a 47.5. But, I still believe it's doable. You just got to make a lot more sacrifices to get there. And
I think a lot of people also, when I teach my kids this, and you may want to consider, maybe you already do, is sales ability, teaching that to the people around you, to your family, because a lot of what you did is not being done with most people in their jobs, selling themselves up to make better money. You came in at a lower rate, but you eventually parlayed that into a 6-figure income by adding value to the company. And I was going to ask you at that point, did that have anything to do with sales ability and selling yourself? Okay, I've done this and I've added this kind of value. Is there any way we can get me, instead of these little, piddly 1 to 3 to 4% yearly cost of living raises, how do I get 30, 40, 50%?
Yeah, I think some of it's opportunity. Some of it is not letting yourself get stuck with a company that doesn't recognize your contribution. I think there's a lot of companies that don't recognize the contribution of their team members. And so they're not incentivized to perform better, and that's one thing that I think you need to do. Fortunately, I was in a company that was wired that way. And the first company I was with was, kind of halfway there, halfway not. And then when I got into the digital space or technology space, that company was very recognizing of people's talents and what they get. And so you were very much incentivized to produce and do more. Everything was tied to like a net profit, like, grow revenues, grow your value. and then get recognized for it. And that's very incentivized based. And the whole company was wired that way. You know, other people, you know, and I won't mention, you know, friends of mine, family members, they got comfortable, man. And they got comfortable in the job they had and going in and punching the clock, and had the same opportunities, grew up in the same kind of, you know, areas, but they made different decisions. And that's why I go back to choices. I made a choice to invest my time in my own development as a person, while other people don't do that. They decide to stay stagnant. And I think there's a stat out there, something like, I think it's like less than 5% of the people in America read even one book after they graduate high school. So, and I don't know if that's the actual stat, but that's one that kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, wow, that's a sad thing, because that means they're not investing in developing themselves. If they're not reading, they're not developing themselves. And if you read about the CEOs, the top CEOs are reading 40 to 50 books or more a year. And so those guys, I mean, that's a book a week, you know, close to a book a week. I mean, they're investing in themselves.
One a month.
Yeah. And they're in the top of their game. Yeah. And you know, a book a month's good. I'm not, some days I hit that, some days I don't. But the bottom line is you've got to reinvest in yourself regularly if you want to see yourself go places. You want to see your income go up, you either got to invest in it for the job you're in, or you got to invest in it to give yourself a new opportunity, you know, and make a, you know, a career change or a life change or something like that.
I recently went back to where I grew up in Connecticut, and I you know, not as a slam as anybody up there, but I mean, I felt like being surrounded around the people that I grew up with and worked with at some point. And before we moved on, you know, we were in Connecticut. My wife and I grew up until 25, I believe we were, when we moved to Vegas. And when you move to other places, it gets you out of your comfort zone. You have to perform. You have to make things happen. You know, I was in the broadcast industry and radio, but when I went back to visit them, I felt like people were stuck, you know, because they had been in the same place for so long that it just was mind-blowing to me to have them. And a lot of people don't really think that. They think that, like what you're saying, they get into a comfort zone and they limit themselves, and they listen to the same old things. They watch the same old stuff. They watch the movie, you know. Politics, massive waste of time, in my opinion. You know, sporting events, typically massive wastes of time. I understand there's got to be balance, and there's got to be, you know, fruits of your labor in your life and what you enjoy. But I mean, I used to talk politics constantly with people because one of my past jobs was in talk radio, and I came to the conclusion, I'm like, what am I doing here? I can only control the 3 feet around me. All right. What some politician does in Washington, who doesn't even know my name, doesn't matter. And it really, you know, it really kind of shifted the way I think. What's going to happen up there is going to happen. There's nothing much you can really do about it other than voting in local elections and the general election and things of that nature. When it comes down to it, you are in control of what you marinate your mind in. That's why I started the podcast. A lot of other podcasts is what I listen to, you know, and I think that qualifies almost as reading 50 books a year, because I'm constantly listening to, I probably listen to 12, 15 different podcasts. Are there anybody that you listen to at all?
Well, Grant Cardone, and, you know, I'm really focusing a lot more on my marriage. You know, come up on 20 years, I think you kind of get, you have to be careful not to get stagnant. And you go through cycles, right? Just like you could get stuck in a job, you can get stuck in your marriage. And, you know, that's something my wife and I are working on. So, you know, like Andy Stanley's a good one. Charles Stanley's a good one. I mean, and I do agree with you. Like, you just need to absorb material. So whether you're reading a book or you're networking with someone who's smarter than you, you know, meeting with a mentor group, or, you know, going to a conference. I believe the conferences I've gone to have grown me as much as a year's worth of growth, you know. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, you got companies that will reinvest in you. But even if they hadn't, you know, invested in me to send me to conferences, I should have been paying for those on my own. You know, I should have been smart enough to go, you know what, I need to go to a conference once a year on my own. And, you know, if it's too expensive, well, let me do a local conference. There's stuff going on in your town, you know, if you live in a metropolis area, all the time. You just got to reach out and go, what's coming to Nashville? And, you know, Nashville's a pretty big city now. What's coming to Nashville that I don't know about that I could benefit from attending, you know?
And they're not expensive. They're typically not expensive at all.
But unless somebody tells you to do that, you're just not going to do it. But yeah, always looking for opportunities to grow.
The massive amount of information that's out there is readily available and just needs to be found. A lot of these guys put out a lot of their content for free. One of the things Cardone talks about is, he's got the 10X Growth Con. That is great if you want to go and network with other like-minded people. You're probably going to get a lot of good exposure from the speakers, but I have heard that his boot camps that he does that are really a little bit more hyper-focused. I've heard people say, in my first half day that I was there, I've gotten my money's worth. I mean, we can go home and implement some of these things and massively change our companies.
Yeah. And I would say that's true. The conferences that you go to that you can say that, in the first half day, those are the ones you want to be at, because you're going to go, I got one idea and that's all I implemented, but it blew me away. But you end up with like 7 or 8 things. But, some digital conferences I went to, some leadership conferences that I went to were very valuable. What's
some of the hardest hitting things that's ever been shown to you or said to you that really has stuck with you?
What do you mean by that? So the career development, maybe get knocked in the teeth, told to get back up.
There's a saying that I keep, I reiterate from time to time is when you're green, you grow, and when you're ripe, you rot. Little nuggets of wisdom. I believe that all of us have conversations with people that sometimes snippets of them just stay with us. Something that the person said, you remember the scenario. Is anything like, that really shaped you as a person as you were coming up that comes to mind that you could talk about?
Let's see about that.
Yeah, I put you on the spot, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you do. You think about that. I mean, I think more about like life experiences that happened that kind of caused me to grow.
Even life experiences.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you talk about phrases and things like that,
adjust your mic a little bit. I think we're getting a little bit of static. If you can.
Yeah, you've got the Dave Ramsey, better than I deserve. Just realizing every day is a good day. You wake up and you go appreciate it. You got a good family. You got a good life.
We have it pretty good.
Yeah, even when it's hard. My wife was telling me this last week. She's like, I really appreciate how positive you are, even when things aren't going well. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't really think about myself that way, but
it's a choice that we have to make.
Yeah. And I wanted to be like years ago, I kind of decided, I go into a convenience store and things aren't going my way. I could be a jerk and bring out my attitude on the person behind the register who can't do anything to change my day or make my situation better. So I can choose in that moment to be a jerk, or I can choose to be kind of like an uplifting spirit. And it's my choice, right? And I just made a decision then, I called it being an infectious person. And what I mean by that, it sounds like infection, that sounds like a negative term. But what I mean by that is going, I want to be so positive that people, when they meet me, they feel better by meeting me. I want to leave them with a positive experience when they walk away from me. And so, because a lot of times you don't remember what people say, but you remember how you felt when you were around them.
That's very true.
And I definitely don't remember what people say very well, but I remember the experience I had with them when I was around them. And that's the kind of person I want to be. Even in my family, I can yell at my kids, or I can find a better way to kind of lift up their spirits. So
sometimes you got to yell at them, though. I mean, it's just necessary,
Yeah, but I had to rein that in, and I've got 6, so I think I'm yelling at the wrong ones at different times. So I've taken it out on one when the other one should deserve it. But Dave Ramsey's got a lot of great sayings.
I would have to say, and you and I have talked about this, that Cardone would love to have Dave on his show.
Yeah, I heard that one. But it's like,
it's like World Wrestling Federation stuff there, man.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, those are two very strong personalities there. I don't know. I could bet. I don't know that I would place a bet on that one. I don't know who would win that one.
Cardone's a strong person. I've met him in person, and he's a little different. Different off the air, I guess you could say. And a lot of people that I met who were personalities in radio, that seems to be the notion is that their on-air persona is a lot more trumped up than their off-air persona. From Dr. Laura to Howard Stern was that way. A lot of these guys were just completely different off the air, and it's entertainment. It really is. I remember, I was in the radio business, and I remember Dave at one point when he started marketing out to all the trade magazines. That's when I first saw his name. And of course we moved to Nashville, and I find out that he's actually based out of here. He had once said to a friend of mine who knew him pretty well, he's like, look, my show is 3 hours, but I could do it in 6 minutes. It's the same thing over and over again. Dr. Laura was the same thing over and over again. It was formulaic. The set up the topic, bring some callers on, go through the motions, chastise them a little bit, then give them the solution, on to the next caller. Mm-hmm. It's really formulaic. Yeah. Tell me about the first day. You had the goal set in mind. And maybe if you want to mention the age you were at that it happened, that you actually ticked over to being a millionaire.
Yeah. So my goal at 25 was to be a millionaire by the time I was 40. Mm-hmm. And I was a little bit naive. I would just be honest with you because, I did get the math right, but the formula in the math equation changes, and I didn't really understand that at 25. I just said, hey, here's my goal. And, a lot of these teachers will say, write your goals down, because there's a weird thing that happens when you write your goals down, they become reality. And if you don't write them down, they're just dreams, and they never happen. So write them down. And so I'm like, you know what? I did the math. Here's my Excel spreadsheet. I could be a millionaire by the time I'm 40. I made it at 40. Now, it depends on what definition you use, right? Depending on what you look at on the internet, somebody's going to say you're a millionaire when you have $1 million in cash and investments, and not including your house. I was not a millionaire, not including my house. I had $1 million in net worth if you included my house, my investments, my cash, and other assets. So that's why I say I was a millionaire by 40, because of all of my assets that I had. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I have $1 million in like rental properties and house and cash and other assets. So multiple. But yeah, so when you say, hey, $1 million net worth, which is what I say, I don't care how you get there, just get there, because most Americans never get there. And so
you think it's a lot easier than most people think it is.
Yeah. When you go, hey, whether it's your house, your cars, whatever. Now, of course, you want to buy what we call appreciating items, right? If you buy a $500,000 car, well, in 15 years, that car is going to be worth not much, because it's going to go down. It's going to plummet in value. So you don't want to do that. But if you're going to buy rental properties, that, like you said earlier, that's making you money. And so that's growing. So that's where you want to put your money. You want to put your money into something that makes you more money, as much as you can. So, today about 20-25% of my net worth is in my house. The rest of it's in rental properties and cash investments and things like that. So 40 was my age when I crossed what I would call $1 million net worth, all things included. Other people use a different measurement stick. That's the measurement stick I would use, because that's a measurement stick I believe most Americans can get to. And, you read my book. I actually broke it down, what I thought $1 million would look like for somebody when they cross that threshold. It's going to be, like you said, probably 5% in cash, or other kind of commodities, things like that. Maybe it's gold or something like that. Something that's kind of more liquid. And then, you probably got 20% of your net worth in a house, 20-25%. And then the rest of it is going to either be in rental properties or like a 401k or retirement, or an investment, cash, stock investments. But that's kind of a breakdown of how it would look. That's what mine looked like when I crossed the number. So
now the millionaire life you talk about in chapter 15, creating your millionaire plan in chapter 14. So that was your millionaire plan that you laid out on an Excel spreadsheet, talking about what your goals were, getting to those goals at some point before 40 or at 40, correct?
Yeah, at 40. That was my goal, to hit it at 40. Mm-hmm. And so I did it my 40th year. I didn't get there before I turned 40, but before I turned 41. Mm-hmm. And then after that, it was just keep socking away cash, because
you know what I did? It's funny because Kevin Michelson's watching. I think he's still watching. I just had this conversation with him yesterday. You know what I did at 40? I was like, why am I nowhere near where I wanted to be at 40? I had my birthday, and I wanted to be, I wanted to rent a car, because I sold Mercedes, and I said, I want to rent an S-Class for a weekend. And I couldn't do it. I mean, the money to rent one was stupid anyway. And even if I had the money, I'm not sure if I still would. But the fact of the matter was no way in hell that I could actually rent an S-Class at this point in my life. And I'm like, I'm 40 years old. And I forgot to leave out to include the equity of what my wife and I had done for the past 10 years was, she was a stay-at-home mom. And a lot of my income, the benefits and the dividends from that are the fact that we've got very well-adjusted children, and that weren't raised by daycare. So,
yeah, I mean, well, when you talk about that, I mean, we did the same thing. My wife's a stay-at-home mom since we had our first child. So and he's going off to college actually next week. Oh, so 18 years she's been a stay-at-home mom. And done a wonderful job. We have great kids, and we always get compliments. We go out in public. They're like, wow, your kids are so well behaved. We were taking, a lot of parents don't take their kids out to restaurants. And when they're young, like babies and stuff, and we're like sitting there with 5 of them, and they're just, behaving. And everybody's like, what is, how do you do that? Like, how do you keep your kids? But, I give that credit to my wife. And we chose to keep our kids in private school versus public school, and it ain't cheap. And especially when you got 6 of them, and but it's an investment we decided to make. There's a side of me some days I add it up and I'm like, man, that would look really good in a stock investment or some other kind of investment. I'm like, wow, that could really look good. But
without those experience, but you understand the value of what you're doing there with the kids and everything. But there are certainly things that we've done where it's like, man, we could have done something pretty cool with that. And a lot of the reason why people talk about building up that reserve account is for when those opportunities come about. You have an opportunity to invest in a car wash or something of that nature where, you can get money and cash flow out of it, hopefully pretty immediately. But just by putting up, or getting into a capital fund or, my goal right now is that because we've had such a cushy economy for the last 8 to 10 years, eventually it's going to adjust, and I want to make sure that we're prepared for when things go on sale. That we've got the money set aside to do that. Yeah,
that's a great strategy.
Yeah, and it's kind of what we're doing now, near term at least.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier. I would love to go back and talk about it. You talked about debt, and we were going back. So some of these financial guys.
Real quick, do you have an adjustment on your microphone that the input level? Because it seems like your mic's it's cracking up and it seems a little hot for some reason. I mean, if you push it away, I'm getting a lot of crackling and stuff like that. I don't know if people are hearing that while they're watching. Well, let me hear. That's good. You've got an adjustment on there, I think. How's it sound?
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So debt. It really falls into 2 camps, people who want to take on risk and those who don't. And you mentioned the banks are the ones that benefit from it. And the reality is the game is set up for the banks to be the benefactor. It just truly is. And the more I studied and prepared and wrote this book over the last 2 years since I left my former financial training company that I was with, it just became so much more apparent. Everybody talks about real estate and how expensive real estate is right now and the housing bubble that blew up back in 2009, 2008. Well, the reality is it was easy access to cash that did it. The banks started loaning money out like crazy. Everybody's giving out loans. And because of that cash is so accessible, it's the law of supply and demand. The more cash was available, the prices shot up. And you're seeing that again right now. But the real scary thing is with student loan debt, man. And you got student loan debt, but you're also seeing over the last, 10, 15 years, the prices of education in the secondary education system, it's just ridiculous. It's like astronomical. Even like regular small colleges, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, and these kids are going in and getting these student loans. And the math is already showing, the statistics are already showing people are paying for their student loans in their 60s and 70s.
Oh, my gosh. Turn your mic up just a tad, if you could. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's fine.
We're still getting a little bit of static, but that's okay. But I agree with you. And college is now being made irrelevant. I mean, there's a lot of the stuff they're teaching is not relevant anymore. Back in my day when I came out, and actually Kevin just texted me saying the audio is so low, but when I came out from college, or when I went to high school, it was foisted upon us that if you didn't go to college, there was no chance for you. You're going to be relegated to a blue collar job. The kids who went off to the trade school, which was Abbott Technical School, were almost looked at as losers. Well, they were. They're not almost. They were looked at as losers. And it's funny because I remember running into one of them after we had graduated. He's like, man, I'm making 45 grand a year. I'm going, what? We're not even 19 yet. 20, I'm 20 years old going to WestCon, and I'm going, what did I do wrong? And it was again, we're being marketed to go into debt. And it's another way that the banks make out.
Yeah. And what's sad is I'm getting into this. I mean, and we could talk about this all day long. So let's make this really short. Mm-hmm. But it's all set up for the government to absorb it. Mm-hmm. And so where do student loans come from? Who guarantees the student loans? Who pays it? So, some certain politicians are wanting to wipe away student loan debt. Well, who picks up the tab on that student loan debt? So
taxpayers.
The taxpayers, but who's the benefactor? In the end, it's the banks.
Mm-hmm.
The banks, and so no matter where the debt came from or who created it, or the system, all the money flows back to the banks. And so, and you're not talking about just every bank. Yeah, mm-hmm. You're not talking about every bank. You talk about the federal bank, really, is where you're talking about. That's where all the money comes from and then pours back to. So when anything has interest attached to it, as far as debt, it all flows back to the federal bank. And that's the ones that really benefit from it, even the government debt. So, but anyway, we don't have to go into that.
We're getting to the Alex Jones territory of the podcast now.
Well, it's not even Alex Jones. I mean, all you got to do is read about any personal finance book. Jim Rickards. You want to read some good stuff, read Jim Rickards' material. He's got some great, global financial kind of viewpoints when you look at how things work between countries and inside of countries. But yeah, he's got some great books.
And I'm in total agreement with what you're talking about. I think a lot of the problem starts and ends with the Federal Reserve Bank and the way it's kind of been constructed and how our forefathers, I mean, a lot of people, we were fighting for our freedom. Yeah, that's part of it, but they were really kind of ticked off about being overtaxed from England, and they wanted to create a land where they could actually create their own destiny back in the 1700s. And but it wasn't the American dream to own a home. The American dream was to carve out your own path in life without any restrictions. As long as you didn't kill anybody or hurt anybody or maim anybody, that's where I kind of see a lot of things. It's more of a libertarian standard of view from where I sit. But man.
Yeah. So one more thing I would say, not related to that, but you brought up the Millionaire Plan and where I made my decision. I think for me, I'm a planner by nature. I'm a strategic thinking guy, and I think for me, what really made the difference is to go, if you want your money to work, you got to have a plan. And in the book, that's really what I tried to do, is to give people kind of like the tools, like the knowledge, but also to go, it's not enough to have just the knowledge. You've got to put it together in such a way that you have a plan that will actually work for you and get you somewhere. It's kind of like taking a trip, right? If you just drive across the country, who knows where you're going to end up? You need to think through where you're going to stop, where you're going to go, where you need to get gas, or you may not get to your destination. You may end up broke down in the middle of the desert or in the middle of a forest, or even worse, on a dead-end street in the middle of the night with a dark house. You don't really want to find yourself in those kind of places. You need a plan. And to get the right plan, you need the knowledge first. And that's what I'm really trying to do with that, is kind of say, hey, how do you put all this stuff together so that you can really build wealth? And you said $1 million isn't a lot of money. It's really not. I mean, to a lot of people, it goes, wow, that's a lot of money. If you ask a lot of my friends, they would say that's a lot of money. But the reality is, if you're at retirement age,
it's not
a lot of money. Yeah. And, you said retirement is a concept. I really don't like that concept personally. I like to really think about, you want to get to a place and an age where you can do what you want to do. You want to live out your dreams. So call it a dream age or something like that. I like to think of it at 59 and a half versus, the government keeps raising the number. And I think there's talk about raising it again. I think it's at 67 now. It's full retirement. They're talking about moving it to 69. Well, I mean,
what's the average that people are dying? Let's move it to that number so we just keep the money for ourselves, which is what they've been doing.
Yeah, and that's a scary thing, you know. And I'm that matters a lot to me. So I try to go, instead of going that direction, let's move the direction back. You know, 59 and a half is the first age that you can take your money out of retirement accounts without getting a tax hit. You know, so why don't we set it at that? You know, and then live, like, call it your dream age. Like, when can you start living your dreams? Now, some people can get there a lot faster. I know, you know, we talk about becoming millionaires. I met one guy while I was writing this book, and he put me to shame. He said, I made my first $1 million when I was 22 and I didn't go to college. And I'm going, holy crap, you know, that's doing something. And then
it's thinking outside of the box. And a lot of people, a lot of Americans are just not conditioned. It was Brad Lee who said it on one of my previous episodes. He said, we've been crammed so full of crap over the traditional educations that we've had that nobody thinks non-traditionally. You know, when I grew up, it was go to college, get a quote unquote good job for security, and everything's going to be honky-dory. Well, for a lot of people, that didn't pan out. In 2008, the rhetoric before that was put your money away, save for retirement. 2008 happened, and for a lot of people around that time, it didn't pan out. That was catastrophic. I mean, the paradigm has shifted massively and is shifting, you know. I talk to voiceover people all the time in another separate, you know, we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but there are so many people that are romantic about the past and how things used to be done, especially when it came to creative arts and things of that nature. Most voiceover people got paid very well. Well, what's been happening over the past 10, 15 years is that the technology bar has been brought down. The barrier to entry has been brought down, and you got so many people onboarding into the creative arts space, photography, voiceover, audio editing, video editing, podcasting. Anybody can do it. And what they're not getting is the fact, like what you talked about, supply and demand. When anybody can do it, you become less special and things become commoditized. Therefore, the prices come down. And there are people out there that just, well, we got to have solidarity. We got to link on. Well, guys, it's just good luck with that. I'll be over here learning. I'll be honing my sales game and concentrating on Jim McCarthy Inc. and putting my value proposition together, which I think a lot of people, Americans especially, need to start thinking in that direction. Sales does not get taught. And selling is so pivotal and critical to wealth building. Salespeople typically are the most powerful income earners of any profession, other than, you know, doctors and lawyers and of course, but even lawyers have to sell. It's a sales job, really, when you break it down. So,
yeah,
not that I was interviewing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, well, that kind of became evident during my journey. I was looking for ways to make extra money because my income, I hadn't seen it take off yet. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go make some extra money. I'm going to get a second job. So I went to work for Gateway Computers. Now, I think they've since been shut down, but I took a sales job with them. And what I realized at that point, you know, you get paid really well if you can sell. But that was my first exposure really to a sales position. But in other companies, you realize those are the guys that make the most money. They're the ones that are the breadwinners for the company itself. And so the company needs to take care of those guys first. And then, you know, then you have your specialty, your technicians and things like that. And then you get your, I guess, more administrative type roles. And so one of the things I want to do, I haven't done it yet, but it's actually talk about this kind of like career growth path. Because I think when you start out, you know, even in, you know, and I kind of talk about this, you get kind of like income lock, right? So like when you get your first job, like my son just got his first job, he's working at Jimmy John's, and he's making, I think they pay him $9 an hour, and then he will go out and drive and get tips. And when he's doing tips, he's getting $20 an hour, and when he's just making sandwiches, he's getting $9 an hour. And so he's getting that concept, like, you know, there's the income gap. And then when I talk to him, I'm like, hey, you need to get, like, understand that you're going to work the same 40 hours throughout your life, no matter what job you're going to do. You've just got to choose how much money you want to make for that 40 hours. You know, do you want to make $9 an hour, or do you want to make $100 an hour?
Mm-hmm. And
then you figure out what you got to do to make that $100 an hour. You know, and the list goes up. Like you're saying, if you're making $1 million a year, like Grant Cardone and those guys talk about that, you're making about $500 an hour. You know.
Yeah, it's like $18 a minute. I think is what it boils down to a traditional 40-hour week.
Yeah. And so, but it's just your concept. And really, mine didn't really shift until I was probably pushing closer to 30. I was still in that locked in mindset of, hey, if I just inch up a little bit, I went from making, let's see, $7 an hour to 15. I'm like, man, I'm living high on the hog here. 7 to 15. We're making 30 grand a year. Then you go, okay, now I'm making 47.5. I've increased my income by 50%. And then you just really don't learn how to dream into those six figures until you actually cross there. But the reality is I wouldn't say anybody can get there, but a lot of people can get to those levels. They can provide that kind of value, and or find that way to make that money. Like you're saying, develop yourself, develop your own brand. That guy that I mentioned at 22 made his first $1 million. He kind of laughed because I made my first $1 million, but he said I didn't know how to manage it, so I lost it all. He didn't have good financial principles. That's one of the things I talk about is learn to keep your expenses low, because you can make a lot of money and you can spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's a principle you have to learn. Don't just spend it. As you make it more, don't spend it. But he did it in the MLM industry. He did it with multi-level marketing, and he's still doing that today. Now he's in his 40s. But I'm like, you know what? I have a pretty good lifestyle, but I don't have that guy's lifestyle. Yeah. He has a better lifestyle than I get. He picking his girls up from school in the middle of the day, dropping them off, working half a day, and doing a consulting gig, making really good money. That's the big he created for himself.
Yeah, lifestyle by design. What's the big plan for you at 50? Where do you want to be?
I'm kind of I'm kind of on a mission right now. I want to obviously continue to grow my income. I would say my next goal is I want to break. I'm not to $10 million yet. I would like to get to 10 million and beyond. Grant Cardone I was listening to him the other day, and he was saying some stuff about where to get your financial advice. And, I'm not, there's guys that are billionaires. How did they get there? They started by dreaming about becoming billionaires and providing value. That's where if you provide enough value, you'll get to that level.
Amen.
Yeah. And I'm really in a mindset. I want to get to a point where my family's comfortable. My wife's comfortable. I want to spoil her, crazy. But I really want to make a difference in the world, especially in the personal finance space. Like I mentioned, about 10% of American households are millionaire households. There's about 115 million households in America. And I think right now it's like 10.7 of those are millionaire households. I think that number could be a lot bigger when you look at the ratios between the white Americans, Asian Americans, Africans, and Hispanics. CNN published some statistics that were kind of saddening to me, and they talked about net worth. The average white American's net worth is about 115 grand. Asian American is like 69 to 79,000, and then it talked about African Americans, and the average net worth of an African American, according to CNN, was about $4,500. And that's when the light bulb really started going off for me. I've been in the personal finance space for 16 years, going on 20, pretty soon, thinking about money for 23 years, and it just hit me that there's a reason that financial literacy is not really making its way down into the lower income areas of America. And the financial literacy efforts in schools are not really doing well. I saw some statistics on that the other day. The number of states, I think it's like 16 states, have formalized financial literacy programs, like where they're actively trying to get it into schools. And that's atrocious. That's if you're going to teach a kid a skill, teach them how to manage their money. That's going to go with them from ages young until they're old. I want to make a real big difference in those communities is what I really want to do. And that's probably what I'm most excited about having my own book, because I can sell my book all day long. It's for sale right now, for pre-sale, or I can give it away. Mm-hmm. I can give people this material in a mass scale and make a huge difference, you know. And
well, the good thing is that if you decide to go on a speaking circuit, you have something, because a lot of speakers, that's kind of part of the equation you need is to have the book. And as you and I both well know, there's no money in books anyway. So it is a great thing to give away.
Yeah. And, online, I'm a digital guy, so I would love to rock the digital world with financial literacy products, I just, I have this dream of, when you look at Facebook or Yahoo or any of those guys, well, not Yahoo anymore, but, the bigger guys, I'm like, can I do something that will impact people's lives on that scale? And that's really what I'm after, if I'm 65, 70 years old, you said 50, I'll give myself a little bit more time. I would love to do something that's that big, but has an impact on people's lives, not just provides a service like search or video sharing or, photo sharing like Facebook does or Connection. I would like to really find a way to impact people's lives in a positive way. And so for me, money is a starting point, but I'd like to go well past that. I have some ideas around that. So
absolutely. Well, Tony, I think you're going to be impacting people quite a bit. It's a great book. Certainly puts a great roadmap out there in terms of the beginnings of what you need to do to start getting your house in order and then taking it to the next level with how to begin compounding and growing your wealth. Tony Bradshaw, the book is The Millionaire Choice. Where can they find you, Tony? Where can they follow you? Are you on Twitter, Instagram? You said that you weren't on Facebook. You're on your wife's account. Where can people find and follow you?
Yeah, so I have a Twitter account. Obviously, it's Tony Bradshaw. I was fortunate to grab that. And then I've got a blog at tonybradshaw.com.
Right on.
And then the book is hosted at themillionairechoice.com. And it's available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble. And then it'll be out formally in November. That's when it goes to the stores.
Right on. Tony, thank you for being my guest for episode 21 of the JMVO Weekly Primer. I try to make it weekly. I think I've missed a few weeks here in the past episodes, but I've got 21 episodes, so you can listen to them over and over again. Of course, listen back to some of our previous episodes that we've had with Matt Monero, Brad Lee. I believe we've got a special guest coming up here in a couple of weeks. It's going to be quite a knockout, both physically and content-wise. But make sure you comment and rate and subscribe to the podcast if you love it. I'd love for you to tell your friends about it. And of course, let me know if you have any guest ideas or if you want me to cover any topics, or even if you want to let me know what you're marinating your mind in. I would love to talk about all that kind of stuff and share that information with you. Tony, once again, thank you for being my guest, sir.
Thank you for having me.